In the heart of Somerset, England, there lies a small village. It is called Chiltern Canterlow. For hundreds of years, life there was slow and quiet. Farmers worked in their fields from sunrise to sunset. Shepherds watched their flocks on the green hills. The villagers knew each other well. They went to the same church on Sundays. They shopped at the same small market. In the evenings, they would gather at the local inn. They would share stories over warm ale. It was a peaceful place where nothing much ever happened. The days were predictable and the nights were usually silent except for the hooting of an owl or the rustle of wind in the trees. At the centre of this village stood an old manor house. It was called Higher Chiltern Farm. The house was built of dark, weathered stone. It had stood there for centuries, watching the village grow. Its windows were like dark eyes looking out over the fields. The roof was covered in thick green moss. A tall stone wall surrounded the property, keeping its secrets safe inside. The people of Chiltern Canterlow respected the family who lived in the manor. They were important people, but they also whispered stories about the old house. They said it had a history. They said strange things happened there, things that could not be explained by logic or reason. Life in the 1600s was hard for the people of Chiltern Canterlow. They depended on the seasons for their survival. A good harvest meant they would eat well through the winter. A bad harvest meant hunger and hardship. They believed in old traditions and superstitions. They saw signs in the flight of birds and omens in the shape of the clouds. They told stories of ghosts and goblins to frighten their children into behaving. These tales were a part of their daily lives. They were as real to them as the stones in the fields and the water in the well. The manor house, with its long shadows and ancient walls, was the perfect setting for such a story, and so the stage was set for a tale of darkness. In this quiet, ordinary village, something terrible was about to happen. It would not be a story of goblins or fairies. It would be a real story, a human story of love, betrayal, and a haunting that would last for centuries. The peace of Chiltern Canterlow was about to be shattered. The silence of the night would soon be broken by screams, and the old manor house would become home to a restless spirit, a spirit that could not find peace. The story of Anne Walker was about to begin, and the village would never be the same again. Living and working in the grand manor house was a young servant girl. Her name was Anne Walker. She was known throughout the village for her cheerful spirit and her hard-working nature. Anne had spent most of her life within the stone walls of Higher Chiltern Farm. She started her work before the sun came up. She would scrub the cold stone floors until they shone. She polished the heavy wooden furniture and tended to the fires in the hearths. Her days were long and filled with endless chores, from mending clothes to helping the cook in the hot, smoky kitchen. Despite the hard work, she was said to be content with her simple life. But Anne had a secret. She was deeply in love. The object of her affection was the master of the house, a man of wealth and status far above her own. In the stolen moments of the day, they would share quiet words and glances. He promised her a future filled with happiness, a life away from the toil of servitude. Anne believed him with all her heart. She dreamed of a day when they would be married, when she would be the lady of a house of her own. This secret love was a bright light in her otherwise plain existence. It gave her hope and made the long hours of labor feel less burdensome. Anne's love, however, was a dangerous secret to keep in the 1600s. The divide between a wealthy landowner and a poor servant girl was vast. Society would never approve of such a match. Her fellow servants whispered in the corridors. They saw the way the master looked at her. They saw the blush on Anne's cheeks when he was near. Some were jealous of the attention she received. Others were worried for her. They knew that such relationships often ended in heartbreak and ruin for the girl involved. They warned her to be careful, to guard her heart, but Anne was too lost in her dreams to listen to their cautious words. The story took a darker turn when Anne discovered she was with child. This was a catastrophe for a young, unmarried servant girl. In those times, it meant shame and disgrace. Her future, which had once seemed so bright, now looked bleak and uncertain. She went to the master, the father of her unborn child, believing he would stand by his promises. She trusted that he would protect her and their baby. She hoped he would finally make her his wife, as he had sworn he would. Anne Walker put all her faith in the man she loved, unaware that her secret was about to lead her not to a wedding, but to a terrifying and lonely end. One evening, as a fierce storm raged over Somerset, Anne Walker disappeared. The wind howled like a hungry wolf around the corners of the manor house. Rain beat against the window panes in a relentless rhythm. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the very foundations of the old building. It was the kind of night when people stayed indoors, huddled close to the warmth of the fire. It was the kind of night that hid secrets well. On this dark and violent night, Anne was called to the master's study. Her fellow servants saw her walk down the long, shadowed hallway. They never saw her again. She vanished as if she had been swallowed by the storm itself. The next morning the storm had passed, but a strange quiet had settled over the house. Anne's bed had not been slept in. Her place at the breakfast table in the servants' hall was empty. The other servants began to ask questions. Where was Anne? The master of the house gave a simple explanation. He said that Anne had decided to leave. He claimed she had packed her few belongings in the middle of the night and run away. He told everyone she had family in another county and had gone to live with them. He seemed calm, but some of the servants noticed a flicker of something uneasy in his eyes. The story did not sit well with those who knew Anne. She was not the kind of girl to run away without saying goodbye. She loved the manor, despite the hard work. She had friends among the staff. Why would she leave so suddenly in the middle of a terrible storm, and where would she go? Her only known family lived far away, and she had no money for such a long journey. The villagers whispered among themselves. They wondered what could have happened. Some believed the master's story, but others suspected something far more sinister had taken place within the manor's stone walls. As the days turned into weeks, Anne Walker was not seen or heard from again. Her disappearance became a local mystery. The master of the house quickly hired a new servant girl to take her place. He forbade anyone from speaking Anne's name. He wanted her to be forgotten, to become nothing more than a passing memory. But some secrets do not stay buried. The story of what happened to Anne Walker was not over. It was only the beginning. The house itself would soon begin to tell the tale of that dark and stormy night, a tale of betrayal and murder. Not long after Anne Walker vanished, a strange and unsettling presence began to make itself known in the manor house. It started subtly. At first, it was just a feeling, a sudden chill in a room that had been warm moments before. Servants would be working alone and feel as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. They would turn around quickly, only to find the room empty. Then came the sounds. They were faint at first, easy to dismiss as the creaking of an old house settling or the wind whistling through a loose window frame. But the sounds grew louder and more distinct with each passing week. The whispers became screams. In the dead of night, when the entire household was asleep, terrible, piercing shrieks would echo through the corridors. The screams seemed to come from the walls themselves, a woman's voice filled with terror and pain. The sound was so horrifying that it would wake everyone in the house. Servants would leap from their beds, their hearts pounding in their chests. They would light candles and search the hallways, but they never found the source of the screams. The master of the house would grow angry, insisting it was just the wind, but even he could not explain the raw human agony in the cries. Soon other noises joined the nightly chorus of terror. The distinct sound of footsteps would be heard pacing back and forth in the empty rooms upstairs. They were slow and heavy, the sound of someone troubled and unable to rest. Doors would slam shut on their own, and objects would be inexplicably moved from one place to another. The servants grew terrified. They started working in pairs, afraid to be alone in any part of the house. The cheerful atmosphere of the manor was replaced by one of thick, suffocating fear. The place no longer felt like a home, it felt like a tomb, haunted by a deeply unhappy spirit. The master of the house tried to ignore the strange events. He punished any servant who spoke of ghosts or hauntings, but the phenomena only grew worse. The nightly screams became a regular occurrence, always seeming to come from the area around the large chimney in the main hall. The master became withdrawn and irritable, his face pale and drawn. He rarely left his study. The villagers whispered that the house was cursed. They believed it was the ghost of poor Anne Walker, unable to rest. They said she was crying out from beyond the grave, demanding that the truth of her disappearance be known. Years passed. The master of the manor grew old and eventually died, taking his secrets with him to the grave. The house passed to new owners, But, well, the haunting continued. The terrifying screams, the phantom footsteps, and the chilling cold spots remained. Many families tried to live in Higher Chiltern Farm, but honestly, none could stay for long. The constant disturbances were just too much to bear. Servants would quit after only a few days, their faces white with fear, telling stories of the screaming ghost that haunted the halls. The manor gained a dark reputation, and for a long time it stood empty and neglected, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the village. Finally, a new owner decided that the house needed major repairs. He was a practical man who did not believe in ghost stories. He thought the strange noises were caused by drafts and loose floorboards. One of the biggest jobs was to repair the old crumbling chimney in the main hall. This was the very same area where the screams always seemed to be the loudest. Workmen were hired to take down part of the chimney breast and rebuild the structure. They set to work with their hammers and chisels, chipping away at the old stone and mortar that had been in place for decades. As they worked, one of the men's tools struck something hard behind the stones. It did not sound like rock, it was a hollow, brittle sound. Curious, the workmen carefully removed the surrounding bricks and mortar. There, hidden away in a small, dark cavity, they made a shocking discovery. It was a human skull. The skull was stained and old, and it stared out at them with empty eye sockets. A wave of cold dread washed over the workmen. They immediately stopped what they were doing. They knew the stories. They knew about the screaming ghost and the legend of the murdered servant girl. The news spread through Chiltern Canterlough like wildfire. Everyone in the village was certain that the skull belonged to Anne Walker. This, they believed, was the final proof of the old story. She had not run away. She had been murdered, and her body had been hidden behind the chimney by her cruel lover. The discovery of the skull explained everything. It explained the screams that came from that very spot. It explained the feeling of sorrow and pain that permeated the house. The villagers felt a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. The truth, it seemed, had finally been uncovered after so many years. The owner of the house, though shaken by the discovery, was a devout man. He believed the skull deserved a proper Christian burial. He felt that if Anne's remains were laid to rest in consecrated ground, her troubled spirit would finally find peace. The haunting, he reasoned, would then cease, and the house could become a normal home once again. So he arranged for the local priest to conduct a small service. The skull was carefully placed in a small wooden box. A grave was dug in the quiet churchyard under the shade of an old yew tree. The villagers gathered to watch, their faces somber, hoping this would be the end of the curse. The small procession made its way from the manor to the church. The priest said prayers over the box, and it was gently lowered into the earth. As the first shovelful of dirt was thrown onto the box, a strange and sudden storm rolled in. The sky, which had been clear moments before, turned a dark, angry grey. A fierce wind whipped through the churchyard, tearing at the mourners' clothes and sending leaves swirling into the air. The temperature dropped, and a sense of deep unease fell over the crowd. It felt as though some unseen force was angry that it did not want the skull to be buried. That night, the haunting at the manor house became more violent than ever before. The screams were no longer just cries of pain, they were shrieks of pure rage. They were so loud that they could be heard all the way in the village. Inside the house, a terrible storm seemed to be raging, even though the night outside was calm. Doors were thrown open and slammed shut with incredible force. Furniture was overturned, glass windows shattered without being touched. The family and their servants huddled together in terror, listening to the ghostly tantrum that was tearing their home apart. The owner now knew he had made a terrible mistake. He had not pacified the spirit, he had enraged it. The ghost of Anne Walker did not want a quiet burial. It seemed she wanted something else entirely. The family could not endure another night of such terror. The next morning, looking pale and sleep-deprived, the owner made a difficult decision. He ordered his groundskeeper to go to the churchyard. He told him to dig up the box containing the skull. He was going to return it to the place where it had been found, hoping to appease the angry spirit that was wreaking havoc on his home. The groundskeeper was not happy about his task. He was a superstitious man, and the idea of digging up the skull filled him with dread. But he did as he was told. He went to the churchyard and dug up the freshly buried box. He carried it back to the manor, holding it as far away from his body as possible, as if it were cursed. As soon as the skull was brought back inside the house, a strange and sudden calm fell over the property. The oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted. The air felt lighter. It was as if the house itself breathed a sigh of relief. The family hoped that the worst was over, but the owner still felt uneasy having a human skull in his home. He decided to try to get rid of it again, but this time he would take it far away. He wrapped the skull in a cloth, placed it in a satchel, and rode his horse out of the village. He planned to throw it into a deep pond several miles away, a place so remote that it would never be found. As he rode further and further from Chiltern Cantello, his horse, which was usually calm and steady, became agitated. It started to sweat and pull at the reins, its eyes rolling with fear. Suddenly the horse reared up on its hind legs, screaming in panic. It thrashed about wildly, completely out of the owner's control. The man was thrown from the saddle and landed hard on the ground. The satchel containing the skull was flung into a ditch. The horse, now free, galloped away in a frenzy, disappearing over the hill. The owner, bruised and shaken, picked himself up and retrieved the satchel. He knew then that he could not get rid of the skull. It would not allow itself to be removed from the place it considered its home. It seemed Anne's spirit was bound to the manor. Defeated, the man walked the long miles back to Chiltern Cantello, carrying the satchel with the skull. He was tired, sore, and deeply frightened. The legend was true. The skull had a power of its own, a power to cause chaos and disaster for anyone who tried to move it. He had tried to give it a peaceful burial. He had tried to dispose of it far away. Both attempts had ended in terror and failure. There was only one thing left to do. He had to accept that the skull and the ghost of Anne Walker were a permanent part of the house. Upon his return to the manor, the owner knew he could not risk angering the spirit again. He accepted that the skull had to remain within the walls of the house. He instructed the workmen to return to the chimney. He told them to rebuild the cavity where the skull had been found. He wanted to return it to its original hiding place, hoping this would restore the fragile piece. The workmen who had heard about the disasters that followed the skull's removal were nervous but agreed. They understood that this was not a normal job. They were dealing with forces they did not understand, and they proceeded with great care and respect. The skull was carefully placed back into the dark recess behind the chimney breast. It was the exact spot where it had rested for so many years. As the workmen began to seal the opening with fresh stones and mortar, the atmosphere in the room grew still and quiet. There was no rage, no violent outburst from the ghost. It seemed that this was what the spirit wanted. It did not want to be buried in the churchyard or thrown in a pond. It wanted to remain in the house, a silent and permanent witness to the crime that had been committed there. The house itself was its tomb. Once the last stone was in place and the mortar had set, the most violent of the hauntings stopped. The terrifying, rage-filled screams ceased. The phantom storms that shook the house abated. The owner and his family were able to live in the manor with a semblance of peace. They learned to coexist with their unseen resident. They treated the area around the chimney with respect, almost as if it were a shrine. They understood that as long as the skull was left undisturbed in its hiding place, the spirit of Anne Walker would remain relatively quiet. However, sealing the skull in the wall did not end the haunting completely. It only quieted the ghost's fury. The house was never entirely free of its presence. The family and their descendants, as well as future residents, would continue to experience strange and unexplained events. The faint sound of a woman crying could sometimes be heard late at night. The soft tread of footsteps still echoed in the empty hallways, and a profound sense of sadness would often linger in the air, a constant reminder that a terrible injustice had occurred within those walls, an injustice that had never been truly set right. Today, the manor house at Chiltern Cantello still stands. The skull of the woman believed to be Anne Walker remains sealed within its walls, hidden behind the stone of the old chimney. The story has been passed down through generations, becoming one of Somerset's most famous and chilling ghost legends. The locals will tell you that the house is still haunted. They say that Anne's spirit has not left. She is no longer the screaming, raging phantom she once was. Instead, she is a quieter, more sorrowful presence, forever tied to the place where her life was so cruelly cut short. Travelers and paranormal investigators who visit the area sometimes claim to hear things, On quiet, moonless nights, if you stand near the old manor, some say you can still hear the faint, mournful sound of a woman weeping. They say it is Anne crying for the life she lost and the baby she never had the chance to hold. Others have reported seeing a shadowy figure of a woman in the windows of the house, looking out over the fields as if she's waiting for someone. It is a sad and lonely vigil, one that has lasted for centuries. The legend says that Anne Walker's spirit cannot find true rest for one simple reason: her murder was never solved. The man who betrayed her and took her life was never brought to justice. He died an old man, his terrible secret safe with him. Because there was no justice in life, her spirit can find no peace in death. Burying her skull did not work because a proper burial was not what she wanted. She does not want to be forgotten in a quiet churchyard. She wants to be remembered. She wants the truth of her story to be told. And so, the haunting of Anne Walker continues. Her ghost remains a part of the old manor house, a tragic figure caught between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The story serves as a dark reminder that some secrets refuse to stay buried, and that the cries for justice can echo through time. Until the day her story is fully known and her killer's crime is acknowledged, the people of Chiltern Cantello believe that the sad, weeping ghost of the poor servant girl will continue to walk the halls of the manor, forever waiting for the peace that she was denied in life.